Perfect. That's a beautifully written setup. Here's an expanded version of your lines, keeping the original vibe, tone, and meaning intact, but giving it more depth, emotion, and imagery. The cobblestone streets of Paris shimmered with a silvery sheen under a late autumn drizzle, as if the city itself were weeping in slow, elegant tears. The golden domes and wrought iron balconies were veiled in a soft, melancholic gray, giving even the grandeur of the 16th arrondissement a dreamlike desolation. High above the glistening avenues, Isabelle Dubois stood still, her silhouette framed by the floor-to-ceiling windows of her penthouse. She gazed out at the blurred horizon, her cobalt blue eyes thoughtful, distant, like they were reaching for something she had long since stopped believing she would find. She looked every bit the Parisian muse, slender, blonde, draped in a silk robe that clung to her like second skin. But where her beauty once held warmth, now there was only frost. Her reflection, striking and statuesque, stared back at her like a stranger. Behind her, the apartment was an ode to taste and restraint. Marble floors stretched beneath bare feet, cool and polished. Abstract paintings adorned the walls like secrets no one had dared to interpret. Every corner spoke of wealth, but none of it spoke of love. The space echoed not with laughter or music, but with silence, comfortable for some, but deafening for her. That morning, Antoine, her husband of 12 years, had left for Frankfurt. Another conference, another meeting, another escape. His departure had been as forgettable as his presence lately. A dry kiss on her cheek, a muttered goodbye, his thoughts already immersed in quarterly reports and profit margins. He had once traced poetry on her skin. Now, he barely touched her at all. Isabelle's life, to the outside world, was a gallery of perfection. Curated, controlled. A masterpiece, much like the 18th century canvases she painstakingly restored at the Musée d'Orsay. But behind the pristine facade, something fragile had cracked. The varnish of romance had faded. Antoine's love, once passionate and all-consuming, had cooled into distant politeness. Their dinners were exercises in etiquette. Their shared bed, a gulf of silk and unspoken truths. She was not a wife anymore, merely a well-kept companion, an accessory to his success. Alone now, she wandered through the rooms of their home like a ghost, beautiful, invisible, and aching for something that no longer lived within those walls. Ready for the next batch of lines, whenever you are. Here's your next section, expanded with the same tone and emotional undercurrent. Romantic tension, quiet betrayal, and emotional erosion, with richer detail and layered atmosphere. Luca's studio was tucked away in the back streets of Montmartre, a hidden world bursting with unfiltered energy. It was the antithesis of Isabelle's pristine apartment, a glorious mess of color and chaos. Canvases, in various stages of agony and brilliance, leaned precariously against the cracked, flaking walls. Violent reds bled into somber, aching blues. The scent of turpentine mingled with stale coffee and the lingering bite of cigarette smoke. Light poured in through the skylight, fractured and golden, casting dramatic shadows across the paint-splattered floor. He worked barefoot, feet stained with pigment. Shirt sleeves rolled to his elbows, sweat glistening along the collarbone, visible beneath his loose linen shirt. A cigarette dangled from the corner of his mouth as though it were part of him. He didn't paint, he attacked the canvas with raw, impatient hunger. Isabelle told herself she returned because she was curious about his art, his energy, the way he looked at her like she wasn't made of marble but of something breathing, burning. One afternoon, he looked up from his work and grinned. "Pose for me," he said, a glint of mischief in his eyes. Then, after a beat, "Not nude, unless you want to." The room seemed to pause. She hesitated, her face blank, but her pulse quickened in her neck. She sat, stiff at first, arms tucked close, her legs crossed too tightly. She felt out of place, delicate and too composed for this untamed world. But Luca was a master of more than just color. As he sketched, he talked, casually at first, then deeper. Stories spilled out of him like brushstrokes, summers spent barefoot in Tuscan vineyards, the bitter wine of childhood, the cold silence after his mother's suicide. His years of rebellion in Madrid's underground art scene, where he learned to survive on paint and pain. Slowly, her guard fell away. She leaned in. She laughed, softly, unexpectedly. He drew her hands, tracing them with his eyes before committing them to paper. The same hands that hadn't been held, let alone adored, in years. The same fingers that Antoine used to kiss in candlelight, now left untouched and forgotten. Under Luca's gaze, they became something sacred again. Days turned to weeks. Messages from Luca started to arrive like whispers she didn't know how to resist. Little notes that made her heart stumble. Meet me at Pont des Arts. Sunset. Just 7 words, but they set her blood alight. She went, wrapped in a coat too thin for the season, drawn by something unnamed. The sky blushed behind them as the sun melted into the horizon. He was already there, waiting, leaning on the rail like he belonged to the river. He kissed her, without asking, his lips tasting of bitter espresso and recklessness. The Seine roared beneath them, like it knew. Her fingers curled around the collar of his coat before she tore herself away breathless. Guilt bloomed inside her, sharp and sour, clinging to her tongue. Later that night, as she stood in her silent kitchen, phone pressed to her ear, Antoine's voice buzzed in from Brussels, distant, dry, transactional. "Did you pay the concierge?" he asked, not even bothering with a greeting. Her eyes flicked to the sketch Luca had given her, lying face up on the counter, a pencil rendering of her standing on the bridge, wind in her hair, heartbreak drawn into every line. "Yes," she said, her voice steady, a lie, smooth as silk. "Ready for the next lines whenever you are. You're building something really emotionally rich here. Keep them coming." Absolutely. This section is devastating in the best kind of way. Here's your expanded version, rich with emotion, sensuality, and quiet tragedy, while staying faithful to the original mood and details. They became travelers of shadows and stolen time, meeting in places that didn't belong to either of them, where reality felt suspended. In sun-drenched Tuscan villas hidden behind lavender fields, in dim, graffiti-kissed alleys of Lisbon that smelled of sea salt and wine-soaked secrets, in anonymous hotel rooms with creaky floors and threadbare curtains. Each setting wrapped around them like a hush. There, away from the judging eyes of Paris and the suffocating silence of home, Isabelle allowed herself to exist. Luca moved through those spaces like a man possessed by beauty. He undressed her slowly, reverently, like peeling back layers of grief. His hands, always stained with paint, traced every inch of her like he was sketching her soul from memory. One night, in a quiet hotel on the outskirts of Siena, his fingers paused over the pale scar low on her abdomen. He looked up, questioning without words. She didn't speak for a long moment. Then finally, her voice barely audible. "She didn't make it. Our daughter." The words felt like stones falling from her mouth, each one hitting the floor with a silent thud. It was a truth she had locked away, one even Antoine barely spoke of anymore. Luca didn't ask anything more. He just kissed the scar. And when he painted her the next day, he titled it L'Amante, the lover. A tempest of gold, crimson, and shadows, a portrait of sin and sanctity woven together. But while she danced at the edge of light, Antoine moved through darkness. He wasn't blind, just patient. He hired a private detective, someone discreet, ruthless, effective. The man followed Isabelle's perfume trail across borders, through boutique hotel lobbies, art exhibits, and winding foreign streets. He returned with proof, photographs that burned with betrayal. The confrontation arrived not with screaming or broken glass, but with the brittle calm of winter. A gray January morning, frost hugging the edges of the windows. Isabelle sat at the breakfast table, a spoon stirring coffee she had no intention of drinking. Antoine walked in without a word and dropped a manila folder onto the table between them. It landed with a soft yet damning thud. She opened it. There she was, caught mid-laugh, her head thrown back in joy. Luca's hands on her waist, their bodies unmistakably close, intimate, alive. Antoine's voice broke the silence, low and cracked like a frayed wire. "You've made me a joke," he said, his tone brittle with something she couldn't name. Anger? Disgust? No. Something sadder. She looked up, bracing for rage, for cruel words and accusations flung like knives. But instead, his eyes, those familiar, measured eyes, were wet. "I loved you once," he whispered. And in that moment, with all the cruel irony in the world pressing down on her chest, she realized something unbearable. He was telling the truth. And somehow, that hurt worse than if he had screamed. "You're really weaving something powerful here. Whenever you're ready, send the next part, and we'll keep building it out." Here's your expanded version of this scene. Bittersweet, atmospheric, and full of aching disillusionment. It leans into Venice's dreamy decay and Isabel's quiet unraveling, keeping your emotional tone perfectly intact. Luca's solo exhibition opened with the theatrical grandeur that only Venice could offer, opulent and decaying, timeless and ephemeral. The city itself felt like a dream on the verge of waking, its canals whispering secrets between crumbling palazzos. Isabel arrived wrapped in a dove-gray cashmere coat, her hair tucked under a beret, her face unreadable. Tourists passed her, unaware of the storm brewing beneath her quiet elegance. Her phone buzzed inside her clutch like a wasp in a jar. Antoine's name flashed across the screen, along with the cold clinical subject line. Divorce papers attached. She didn't open it. Not yet. The gallery was a sea of voices and movement, the white walls lined with Luca's latest works, bold, aching, alive. Critics murmured in reverence. Cameras flashed. Wine flowed. Center stage, beneath perfect lighting, hung La Monte, her likeness immortalized in oil and fire. She stared at it, stunned by how familiar and foreign it now looked. The brushstrokes that once felt like caresses now read like confessions, raw, unreciprocated. Luca was surrounded, his charisma drawing people like moths to flame. He moved through the crowd with ease, his hand resting casually on the waist of a red-haired gallerist in a backless black dress. Isabel watched them laugh, watched the way the woman leaned in as if she belonged there. Luca turned, sensing her. Their eyes locked across the room, a flicker of something old sparking for a heartbeat. Then, as if she were merely another curious patron, he gave a small, polite nod. Cool, distant, rehearsed. It crushed her more than any insult could have. She didn't stay to see who bought the painting. She didn't say goodbye. Her heels clicked sharply against the marble as she fled into the night, past gondoliers and crumbling arches, until she reached the Rialto Bridge. She gripped the stone railing, chest heaving against the weight of everything unsaid. The Adriatic wind howled around her, pulling at her coat, her hair, as if trying to strip her bare. She leaned over the edge, staring down at her reflection in the ink-black water below. The face that stared back was pale, hollow-eyed, smudged with salt and mascara. For a fleeting second, she didn't recognize it. The woman she had been when they first met, the one who'd walked into Luca's studio on a whim, had already begun to fade then. Now she was gone entirely, swallowed by shadows, swept away in paint and betrayal. Had she ever been his muse? Or just a moment, a passing thrill, a story to add to his legend? The reflection didn't answer. Let me know when you're ready with the next part, or if you want help wrapping this up, titling it, or turning it into something longer. This is shaping into a stunning piece. Here's the final part, expanded with care and nuance. A quiet, haunting close that lets Isabel's silence speak volumes while also hinting at resilience. The tone remains intimate, reflective, and full of subtle ache. Isabel lives in a small cottage in Normandy now, far from the glittering galleries and marble floors of her past life. It sits on the edge of a cliff, where the sea crashes endlessly against the rocks like a heartbeat she no longer tries to quiet. The house is spare, almost austere, whitewashed walls, wooden floors that creak in the cold, and windows that open to salt and sky. There is only one piece of art on the wall, a pencil sketch framed in plain oak. A woman stands on a bridge in the drawing, her body half turned, hair swept by invisible wind. Her posture is uncertain, as though she is suspended in a moment of indecision, about to jump or perhaps to turn back. Isabel doesn't remember whether she gave the drawing its place on the wall, or if it simply found its way there on its own. Some days it feels like a memory. Other days, a warning. Most mornings, she walks along the cliffs wrapped in an oversized sweater, her boots crunching over frost-kissed grass. The ocean air is sharp enough to sting, and she lets it, welcoming the numbness it brings to her lips, her cheeks, her fingers. Here, no one knows her name. No one expects anything. Calls from Antoine's lawyer go unanswered. She lets the messages pile up in her voicemail like autumn leaves, untouched and forgotten. She hasn't opened a newspaper in weeks, though she knows Luca's solo tour is being hailed as a triumph. Someone told her he gave an interview in Le Monde where he referred to her as a fleeting muse. She didn't read it. She didn't need to. In the quiet, she has begun to paint again. At first, it was just to keep her hands busy, to feel the old rhythm of movement, the drag of bristles across canvas.